Welcome to the 9th video in the Colored Pencil course, brought to you by thevirtualinstructor.com. Creating Texture, Part 1. In this module, we'll take a look at creating the illusion of texture in a drawing using colored pencils. What is texture? Texture is an element of art that refers to the way an object feels to the touch, or looks as it may feel if it were touched. Since every object has an associated texture, learning how to create the illusion of texture in a drawing is an essential skill. Texture in a drawing is either simulated or invented. Invented texture is texture created by patterns that is not meant to accurately depict observed texture. Simulated texture is the illusion of the actual texture observed on a subject. For most representational drawings, the goal is to create simulated texture. How is texture simulated in a drawing? Texture can be simulated through contrast and values. It is the manner in which light reflects off of objects that informs us of the texture of the object. Other devices, such as directional lines, can be used to indicate texture as well. The combination of accurate value and textural marks, directional lines, will usually result in accurate translation of texture in a drawing. Let's take a look at this in practice. We'll continue with the drawing that was transferred to the drawing surface in the last module. This drawing that we'll be completing here is of a dog, and it's actually my dog. We'll start with the eyes and work our way outward. We want to start with the eyes because we want the eyes to be the focal point of the drawing. We'll begin by layering observed colors, beginning with the color goldenrod and layering on top of that sienna brown. We'll burnish that with a bit of white before progressing on to the dark umber. With each mark that we create on the surface, we're paying special attention to what's observed in the photo reference. The eye is its own unique texture because it is a reflective and wet surface. The key to creating this texture is going to lie in the value and the contrast that happens between these values. Because the eye is wet and thus reflective, we'll have areas of high contrast between the light values, or the highlight, and the dark values, or the pupil of the eye. Generally, there will be a hard edge between these values, so there won't be a smooth gradation between the lights and the darks. We'll need to pay special attention to this when we create the darker values in the eye. And in this case, I'm going to leave a space for the areas of highlight as I create the darker shapes around it. Now, to make the areas around the eye a bit darker, I'm going to continue to layer the dark brown and the indigo blue to create a natural black. Here again, we won't use the color black at all. Instead, we'll layer the dark umber and the indigo blue to create a more natural black. Once we've established the shapes, we can go ahead and establish the highlights with a strong application of white. We also might put down the white underneath the iris portion of the eye to create a smoother transition between areas where there might be a bit of cast shadow on the inside portion of the eye. A few areas of darker hairs are established with the dark umber in hand, and these areas are burnished in using a white. A bit of indigo blue is used to make that area a bit more natural looking. Also, cloud blue is used over the top of the highlight to cool that highlight down a bit. Dark umber and the indigo blue is layered a bit further to make the values in the eye a bit darker here and there. And then this process is repeated on the right eye as well, using the same colors as used before. We'll identify a base color that's going to be used for the animal's coat, and this color is going to be beige. So we're going to begin by establishing the fur using this color. Now we can start focusing on the fur of the animal. Now this is going to be a completely different texture, so we're going to approach the way that we create this illusion a bit differently. Here's a look at the finished hair, and if you'll notice the directional lines that happen here. These directional lines are going to help create the illusion of texture on the surface. So as we're making marks with the colored pencils, we need to keep in mind the way that the fur flows on the surface. These are akin to cross contour lines, or lines that follow the cross contours of the object itself. And it's important to pay attention to these as you make your marks. Failing to do so might create haphazard looking marks and not really translate as fur. We're going to apply these directional marks, or this base coat, with a medium application. It's important that you don't go too dark too quickly, because it'll be hard to layer additional colors on top of it. Some of the areas will also need to be lighter as well. Once we've got these areas established, we can start to create some more directional lines here, some more obvious directional lines, and create those contrast in value that we need to create the illusion of texture. And we'll use the dark umber, the sienna brown, and then we're going to burnish those areas using the beige or the base coat. We'll also burnish a few areas using the white to create some lighter areas as well. Then once these areas are established, we can go back with the dark umber and make some more deliberate marks here to create some differentiation between the individual hairs. Now, here again, there's going to be some areas where light is hitting the fur intensely, so we'll need to burnish those areas using a white. We can continue to work all around the eyes and the different portions of the face using this combination of colors. We're going to be using this combination throughout the drawing. Again, this is dark umber, sienna brown, and then burnishing those areas with the beige color. Then we can go back on top of those, creating more deliberate lines using those same colors. The more that we layer the color, the more depth that appears in the drawing, and the more the fur becomes convincing. Now, there are a few areas where there are some whiskers that come out. In this case, there's a whisker that comes out above the eye. And what I'm going to do here, since we're working on Bristol paper, I can put little grooves in the surface of the paper. That way the colored pencil will not make it into the grooves, and it will create a white line. So I'm just using a paper clip here that's been taped to the end of a pencil to make these marks. So when I layer the colored pencil material on top of it, a white line will appear there. Now, the fur itself is more than just beige. There are some other colors that are present there. So to add a bit more interest, I'm going to use 20% French gray here and there, especially on the areas like the bridge of the nose. To make some of the areas of the coat a little bit more red, we'll use a little bit of burnt ochre here and there in our mixture. We won't use it everywhere, we'll just use it here and there. So again, we'll continue to repeat the process of laying down the beige, layered on top with the sienna brown and the dark umber, and then burnish those areas in. In this case, no underpainting is used here. I'm taking the drawing a section at a time, trying to build up those changes in value. And speaking of changes in value, remember the texture is all about the value. So as we work, we need to make sure that we're aware that we're creating light values, midtones, and dark values. And we're creating the contrast that's necessary to create the illusion of texture. Now this contrast is going to be created again by the layering of colors that we're using. The beige, of course, is a lighter value. The sienna brown is kind of a mid-tone, and then the dark umber, of course, is a darker value. So using this arrangement of colors is naturally going to lead to a fuller range of value, and placing the values in the appropriate spots is what's going to lead to the illusion of texture. With every mark that's made, even the marks that are used for burnishing, we want to make sure that they're following those directional lines. These directional lines do a whole lot, not only to create the illusion of texture, but also to define the form of the dog and the dog's face here. Here, a bit of the sienna brown is used to darken up some of the areas just to create a fuller range of values to create those midtones that are necessary. The outside portion of the dog's head is very light and in contrast with the background, so we'll erase some of the graphite marks that remain so the top portion of the head can be very light in value. We'll continue work over to the ear, again repeating the same process of laying down the beige color initially and then layering on top of it with the sienna brown and eventually the dark umber. Again, thought is given to the directional lines, since these directional lines help create the form of the object. In the case of the ear, there's more complexity here in these directional lines, so it's a good idea to slow down in these areas and really pay close attention to what's happening in each section of the ear. There's also going to be some areas where the contrast is greater between the dark and light values. There'll be instances where the hair crosses over other patches of hair, and it's important to create this illusion by having the dark values right next to light values. It would be really easy to get obsessed with each little section, but instead you want to try to create the illusion of texture, and if you get the texture right, the accuracy of the individual shapes is less relevant. So, in your observation, you should look for patterns that exist and try to simulate those patterns. Again, this illusion is built up using the same combination of colors, the beige, sienna brown, and dark umber. There are darker values that exist on the bottom portion of the ear, so I'll use more of the dark umber in those areas. Each application that's made here is generally a medium application. If you get too dark or too heavy with your applications, of course it's hard to change course, so it's always a good idea to start with lighter applications and build up. Here, burnt ochre is used to add a bit more variety to the color. This color is a bit more red than the sienna brown and will create a little bit more variety. Again, this color is used sparingly, not everywhere, just in areas. A bit of the 20% French gray is used here as well, just so that we have some harmony and unity to the drawing. If you use a color in one area, it's a good idea to use it at least in one other area as well. With the ear complete, we'll continue to move down the face, again laying down the base coat of the beige, and then layering on top of it with the sienna brown and the dark umber. We'll carefully build up the values using the directional lines. And then those areas are burnished using the beige. The areas of highlight are burnished using the white, and areas of detail can be added on top of the burnished areas. In this case, a few extra strands of hair are added using the dark umber. There are a few places where the whiskers come out of the face and the value gets a bit darker. We'll add these with the dark umber. And then we'll use our tool to create the whiskers themselves by again putting indentations into the surface of the paper. These will not show initially, but when we do the areas around them, you'll find that the pencil doesn't make it into the grooves, and these areas translate as white whiskers. Around the front edge of the nose, the value gets darker, so we'll put more pressure on the dark umber. Again, the contrast in value and the directional lines that are made are what's going to lead to the illusion of texture. So what did we discuss in this module? Well, we discussed texture, specifically simulated texture, which is meant to accurately depict the texture on the observed object. We discussed the keys to creating simulated texture, which includes creating accurate values, as well as textural marks or directional lines. In the next module in this series, we'll finish up the drawing.